I've started my career way back here in 1982 when the statistic was 1 in 500. So I've seen a 20-fold increase in autism in the time that I've been practicing. To this gentleman's question a little bit, in 1982, that was before 1994 when they opened up the spectrum to the higher intellectual side of the spectrum. Before then, you had to have an intellectual disability to have autism. So that made a huge difference. It was also before 1990, okay? Anybody knows what happened in 1990? Individuals with Disabilities Act, right, of 1990. First time that autism was a diagnostic classification, not diagnostic, a classification for the public schools. Before that, if you were in the public schools and you were autistic, you were emotionally disturbed, speech impaired. Moreover, you probably weren't in the public schools. You were probably in a special school. So I worked way back then, both in Wisconsin and in Rhode Island, in psychiatric hospitals, because that's where you'd find the kids on the spectrum. And a lot of kids didn't go to schools. So before 1990, and really before 1995, in the school system, people didn't know what to do with individuals with autism, right? Now things are much better. People have learned more about what to do with autism. Many more people are using evidence-based practices, but there's still unprecedented challenges. There are still, with that 20-fold rise in the prevalence, there are still many, many people who don't know how to work with individuals with autism. And Shelley said, as you heard, Shelley, that's your first name, right? So I should call Dr. I'm bad with names, said they use a medical model, right, where we need to be integrated and we need to have the same kind of environment for these children and treat them more as typical children. So there's unprecedented challenges in teaching individuals with autism, teachers and therapists about individuals with autism. There's also places, I know in Texas, I was on the Governor's Council for Autism and Pervasive Developmental Disorders for 8 years, so I know a lot about what's going on in Texas. We're a huge state. The Metroplex where I live, Dallas-Fort Worth area, is geographically the size of the state of Connecticut and Rhode Island combined, so we're big. We have remote places that have no people, no specialists, no teachers who know how to work with autism, but there are still children on the spectrum. So we need to be doing something to help these teachers. We need to be working with how to build capacity. And so one of my special interests is building capacity. So I teach speech-language pathologists about autism and how to treat and how to assess children with autism at the University of Texas at Dallas. I also have a preschool that I developed, and I wrote a book with the curriculum in the preschool to help teachers out there. It has a full curriculum. You can just rip it out and use it, but also the theory behind it. And I was finishing this book in about 2013 or so. And just as I was finishing it, you know, they say one door closes and another door opens. I get a call in my office. And I just remember the day so distinctly. I'm writing that book, and Fred Margolin calls me. He is the owner of Robokind. His son Richard will be talking after me, who is also one of the major designers of the Milo robot. And they said to me, and this was before Milo existed actually, and he said to me, never met Mr. Margolin, called me and said, hey, how would you like to write a curriculum for a robot, a social skills curriculum for a robot? I went, Well, the first thing I said was no. actually. He had had some things, it was a very discrete trial of applied behavioral analysis things that he was showing, and I said, that's not me, I don't do that, sorry, you have to find somebody else. Well, he said, you can do whatever you want to. Huh? Okay, that's kind of interesting. So I had to think about it. And one of the things that I found was that when I reviewed the literature, the most prominent finding were that children on the spectrum were more engaged when the partner was a robot than when the partner was a human. And so this is not my research, but I just want to show you what that might look like. So this is Cole. He's 14, very cooperative. And he's not very interested.
Let's play a game. Okay. Sometimes I like to play a game called Follow the Leader. First, I'll be the leader.
A little more interested.
Then you do the same thing. Ready? I can move my arm.
Okay, so that was pretty interesting. And actually the first interaction I thought was a good interaction for Cole until I saw the second interaction. Cole's 14, and I actually treated him when he was 3, so we go back a long way. Well, this issue of engagement was really interesting to me because all of my empirical work and all of my translational work has been on the issue that sharing engagement, right, and social emotional engagement is the precursor for social understanding. So I've done this in my empirical work with both typically developing children and with children with autism, and my translational research into therapy is all about engagement leading to social understanding. So I called up Mr. Margolin and said, yeah, I'll see if I can write a curriculum for you. So that's how I started. So it was really difficult to think about how to write a curriculum since most of the time I am in a classroom and I'm interacting with children. And how do I write a curriculum that's going to fit many children at the same time? So it was really hard because Shelley talked about the IEPs, right? So I'm used to gearing my therapy directly to one specific child and that child's strengths and weaknesses, and now I have to write something that's kind of for everybody. So that was a challenge, and it took me a while. But I came to the conclusion to work with evidence-based practices, of course. It has to have evidence-based practice. One of the questions is Milo evidence-based? But I will say that Milo delivers evidence-based practices, meaning that there's scientific evidence to say that these work with children with autism. I use social narratives, which Milo describes a social situation. So that's a social narrative. We've talked about the visual supports, the icons, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. The icons on the chest that have very simple vocabulary that have to do with the lessons. And then, as Shelley said, there's a iPad. He describes the lessons, and then you see somebody doing it on a video model on the iPad. And then he asks lots of questions, so there's natural modeling, prompting, reinforcement, and it's all a social skills curriculum. So I know Milo's more exciting than I am, so we'll just let him talk to you a bit.
Hello. I'm A.
See
Learning fun.
Icons on the chest?
For children with autism. As I talk, I show icons on my chest, videos on tablets, and I can repeat lessons for my friends as often as they need. My courses for autism treatment are written by experts to help children learn and connect if they are verbal and nonverbal.
So that's Milo telling a social narrative about what he does, right? we mentioned the icons on the chest, so this is greeting, and so you'll see that the visual is synchronized with the auditory. I try to do that when I'm giving therapy. I teach my speech pathologists to do it while they're giving therapy, and every time I see Milo, I get so excited because he does it so well. My students don't do it as well as Milo does, so that auditory visual connection is really good. So I said that we needed to build capacity, and I said that I've been trying to find ways to build capacity, and I think that working with Milo has been, for me, another way to build capacity. We have a manual, he's giving lessons, he's not only a model for the children, but he's a model for the therapists and the teachers on how to talk to children. But the other thing that I wanted to do was to make sure that my lessons were as good as possible. So everything in terms of my research I did to improve Milo's intervention to be the best way for the children and to assist teachers. One of the things that happened early on, I was writing curriculum for a long time before there was the Milo robot. One of the people who worked at Robokind was taking the robot out to children just to see how they were reacting to it. And he'd come back to me and he'd say, you know, Dr. Rollins, those kids, they want to tell Milo what to do. They want to control Milo. You have written curriculum for them that Milo tells them what to do. I don't think it's going to work. I said, okay, fine. So my first research question was, to what extent does social control, robot-led versus student-led, affect engagement with the robot? Because this was early enough that I could say, if it doesn't work, if he's correct, I can make some changes. So I had two conditions. Wait a second. Oh, there. Yeah. Two conditions. The first one I'm going to show you is Milo telling the child what to do. So let's look at what that looks like.
Let's play a game. Sometimes I like to play a game called Follow the Leader.
See him imitation? Did you see the imitation?
I'll be the leader. I'll do something. Then you do the same thing. Ready? I can move my arm. You do it too.
Okay, in the next one, now how children communicate with Milo is through this tablet here. So to control Milo, he has to touch the tablet, and that happens very quickly in the very beginning of this clip. So watch for that. And so I videotaped that and I analyzed that for engagement every quarter second was what my measure was. And I had 15 participants in this study. They were between 5 and 14 years of age, so I had pretty much the full school age group. And they were between 53 and 142 in terms of intelligence, so I had the full intellectual capabilities of kids on the spectrum, so it really looked like kids you see in the schools. The inclusion criterion was that they had to understand how to use the tablet to communicate with Milo, and they had to have some kind of picture symbol recognition and answer yes/no questions. And what I found is, this is what I found. I found this is student-led, robot-led. That's the mean percentage. There was no difference, right? Statistically, no difference between how much children engaged with the robot in the student-led versus the robot-led condition. So this here is the mean, and this is the standard error. So basically, the range of plausible values in the population are pretty much between 75% and 91% engagement with the robot. And you can see they spent very little time off task, and there was also not a statistical difference between them. So that was really good because I got to say, okay, I don't have to change all my lessons. So that was like, yay! I think Robokind was happy about that as well. I did find that there was a high correlation between engagement with the robot and age, where the older kids seemed, like Cole, seemed to engage better than the younger kids. But as I'm going to show you in a second, it might have been spurious to task demand, and so I have to really look into that. I didn't see an IQ relationship, and this was significant at the 0.01 level. Now, I've given this data before. I have sent it out to different people, and the question I keep getting is it a novelty effect? Are you getting this because it's a new toy, or is there something else to it? So I have just a little bit of data to look at that issue of novelty, okay? And this is data from a 6-year-old girl, 6.5-year-old girl with autism, and she's going to come up in the next study on social, on conversation. So this is Charlie. And you see that she's very high in the 90s, really on the top of that range that I gave you in terms of engagement with the robot. So that was really good. But if you really look at that graph carefully, at least the question I had was, wait a second, what's going on? She's really engaged, but she seems that her engagement is dwindling just a little bit. What's that about? So when I looked at it more closely, what I found was that the emotional module changed. So the first emotional module are the easier emotions, happy, sad, and angry, and then they get progressively harder as the emotions go on. And so as a clinician, the person, Charlie did well in terms of the happy, sad, and angry. They moved to the next harder module and then the next harder module. So it appeared that as the task demand got harder, her engagement started to change just a little bit. In this, it's not really that much of a deal, right? It's still pretty high engagement for a child with autism learning hard emotions, so that's a good thing. Then we went to the conversational modules. So this is conversational module 1. In conversational module 1, the task demand is very different because in emotion modules, she's just touching the iPad. In the conversational module, she has to say something back to the robot. So in module 1, the child, Milo asks the question, what school did you go, do you go to? And the child has to answer him back, give an answer, right? Fairly simple. So what you see is that she went, wait a minute, what's he doing? This is really different. But she then went right back up to 90% right after that. So that was really good. So we saw that that was in her capabilities. Her teachers has actually said she was pretty good at that, and she didn't have a problem. Then we got to lesson 2. In lesson 2 was something that was out of her skill range. She had to give an answer and then ask the question back. So if he said, what school do you go to? She had to say, Oak Hill Academy. What school do you go to? By the way, Milo goes to UTD if anybody has listened to any of the modules. Oh, and his favorite teacher is Dr. Rollins. So here's her engagement data here. So that doesn't look as good, right? So we really started to think about what is happening, and what we realized that she was below 50% down here in terms of her engagement, so that's at chance level. Well, we figured, this goes to someone's question over there, she didn't understand the task. It was out of her skill level to understand the task. So we had to go in and do something to help her. So what we did is we implemented a visual support during the Milo lesson. Okay, so here, after he said, what school did you go to, the therapist could point to your turn, ask a question, and then what school, or what grade, or who's your favorite teacher, so go to the appropriate question. And that helped her learn what it was she was supposed to be doing. So here's when we implemented, at lesson 14, is when we implemented the support in the lesson, and what happens is she pretty much leveled off about 70%, which was really, think about it, just below average of the standard errors that I gave you. The standard errors were from 75 to 91. So that's not bad, given this was something that was really difficult for her. And when we did these, because we there's different ways you can use the robot, and if I were to use the robot, I would be more engaging with the child, but we used the lessons just as they state in the manual, because my thought was, if you're in a classroom and you give the robot to an aide, the aide's not going to know what to do. Can he be effective in that situation? You have a rural place in Texas, you give them a robot, they don't know anything else, can he be effective? So this was a really high mark that benchmark that I placed on myself for this. But so in terms of a summary for the engagement is high when the child understands the task domain. Yeah?
How do you calculate the engagement values?
Okay, so I forgot how long the video was, but I separated the video. I put the video into a computer program that I use, and I separated it out into quarter-second pieces. And so I looked whether or not they were engaged every quarter second.
Through the eye gauge.
Through the eye gaze, through the body movement, right? So that they were basically looking at him, and that way. I should have gotten I have my criterion written down someplace, but I don't have them all there. So he was on task, he was looking, he was paying attention, he was doing what it was he was supposed to be doing. And I can give you the exact criterion that I use. It was based from other literature that I took the engagement criterion.
Okay. I would love to have that, because we ran a study. Again, I'm a roboticist.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about those stuff, but we have had a study where a child was, in traditional sense, fully engaged with the robot. So for about 5 to 6 minutes, he was fully looking at the robot, but was not responding to the robot at all. So every time the robot was doing something new, he was following the robot.
Yeah.
So we could see that he's actually watching the robot, but he's not doing what the robot is asking him to do.
So the question I would have is actually some of the questions that we were looking at here. Was the task domain too difficult for the child? Did the child understand what he was supposed to be able to do, right? And so in the beginning, Charlie didn't understand what to do. Actually, if I can go back to here, she was at 50% accuracy with Milo until here. And then she became 100%. So 50% is chance level. So she wasn't accurate because it was a difficult thing that she was learning. So one of the things, that's where, a lot of times when we first came out with Milo, everybody was like, okay, is he going to replace humans? We don't want him to replace humans and all those things. Now, yes, you want him to replace humans, but that's a whole other story, right? The human still has to know what the child's skill level is and whether or not the child can do it. As I said earlier, when you've seen one child with autism, you've seen one child with autism. Now, you also have to kind of do some testing. So the teachers in the classroom said that Charlie could ask questions and understand WH questions. They really thought she understood WH questions. But she was really just using nonverbal comprehension strategies. She knew that someone asked her a question, she was supposed to say something, but she might not have really understood what each of the WH questions meant. So you really need to understand the child really well as you're matching them with the technology. At least that's my opinion. And that, I think, bears out in some of the limited research that I've done.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Great. Yes?
So does the engagement include accuracy or that performance criterion? Or is it just more of the passive? Because I can think of kids who would sit there and be engaged, maybe not know how to respond to the task.
Right.
Versus those that may respond incorrectly.
Right. So that's exactly right, because I had two different set of coders for the accuracy data was being kept in the when they did it, I think through the portal, the accuracy data was coming in, but she was not accurate until here. So she was engaged, but she wasn't accurate. But that's again where a human has to come in, because we saw she didn't know what she was doing. We had to be able to do that. Now, I don't know in your work if a robot will ever be able to do that or not. They might be, because I don't have that much imagination. But we still need to make sure the lessons are within the person's scope, right? It's not it can't be a one-size-fits-all. Not every child can get every lesson, because that's just not going to happen. So we still need to do that. But yes, given to your point, she was engaged, but she wasn't. She was about 50% accurate until lesson 19.
But then, so then that emotion, is that the same? That's both the actual, like, kind of passive. I'm sitting here, I'm on task.
Oh, actually, in the emotion modules, because she went on, we wouldn't have gone. If we come back here.
For the accuracy piece.
Yeah, we wouldn't have gone on until she got accurate. So she might not have been accurate at all of them, but we don't move on until she has a certain, yeah. So she did have accuracy. Yes?
I have a question about your previous study, but if you'd like, I can wait till the end
The
to ask.
previous
The
study?
one with the active and the passive robot?
Oh, well, that was, oh yeah, okay. Would you like to ask? What time? I have one more small study to get through. I've got time, okay, yes?
So did you use the same group of children for both an active robot and the passive robot?
Yes. So that was a paired t-test that I used, and I randomized if they got one condition first or the other condition first. So that was randomized. And I had a washout condition in between where they went and they read a book with somebody in between the two conditions.
And that's how you try to control for the bias?
Right. So yeah, so the randomization, and I checked to see if the kids who got the robot condition first versus the student condition first, because those were randomized, if they did any better or worse, and there was no difference. And I did use that washout condition, so there was something in between, and that's a fairly standard model in some of the intervention research.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm really happy that you used a girl. It's rare that we have autism research with girls, so I'm really happy you did that. However, I was just wondering if you did this with also a male, just because we know that females and males on the autism spectrum engage and have social emotional intelligence that are very different from one another, meaning that women tend to score higher in the social emotional component than males on the autism spectrum. So I was wondering if you looked at the engagement with a male.
Oh yeah, I did. I mean, in the first study, engagement was mostly men. There was some, I didn't put the male-female ratio. I had some girls and some mostly guys, but it's 3 times more prevalent. Well, they think it's 3 times more prevalent in boys than girls. I think that it's our ability to find girls. I'm doing an early intervention study right now and getting a lot of girls. It's amazing how many girls we're getting. And I do think, I hate to say this, but I do think that we don't understand girls enough, and that's why we think there's so much of a difference. I think if we understood girls better, there'd be less of a difference, but that's my theorizing. I apologize. But Charlie is a girl. I'm going to show data from a boy as well, but we have his engagement data, but we ran out of money, so I didn't have anybody who could code all of his engagement data. But I will find some, and I will be able to compare the two of them. But they looked from what the clinicians subjective feeling was, they looked fairly the same kind of a situation.
Okay.
But it really is that issue of they engage better when they understand the task, and sometimes when it's a hard task for them, it's harder to engage. But once they get it, they do better. Make sense? Okay. So, I got to find out where I am. Supports. So we talked about these things. Okay. So, for me, I really don't care what a child does with Milo in his room by himself. As a clinician, I've always said to parents, I don't like to do therapy in a therapy room one-to-one with the child. I always say if the child can't go out and do it, then my therapy isn't worth very much. So the whole idea of generalizing to humans is a really important thing. And so I wanted to look at generalization, and I have a single subject design of 3 children to look at generalization to humans. So I had 3 children, Charlie being one of them, 2 boys and Charlie, with moderate to severe autism. That was determined by the ADOS-2. The 2 boys and Charlie, the boys were 4 and 5'8", and Charlie was 6'6", and they all attended private schools for learning different children. Let me see. Okay, so I had 2 phases. There was the Milo intervention, and then there was the classroom generalization data, right? And so for Milo intervention, they went to a classroom, an individual room with a therapist twice a week for 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how long it took for them to get through what they were supposed to be getting through. Baseline Milo delivered the emotion lessons. That's why we had that great emotion data for Charlie. And then intervention, Milo delivered one of the conversational module lessons. So the conversational module, it has several, the conversation module has several lessons. The first lesson is a greeting, right? Because you have to negotiate co-presence before you can talk to somebody. So the first one was a greeting. The second one we didn't do, which was leave taking, saying goodbye. Notice we have a different word for saying hello and saying goodbye, because I believe in a core set of vocabulary where it's only one function for each word. And then it was what I explained to you before. First answering a question and then answering and asking. So the first child did, the 4-year-old boy did the initiating greetings. Of course, Cole's not a 4-year-old boy, but I have releases on him. So I'm just going to show you what that lesson looks like so you can get a feel for that lesson.
When we greet the friend, we look at the friend's face, smile, and say hi. I can say hi to other kids. I can say hi to grown-ups. Let's see some of my friends saying hi to each other. Look at the tablet.
That's his tablet, and then he had to go back to that one. So that was the social story that you heard, very simple social story for greeting, and then there he was getting his video models about different greetings. I will say that this is not part of the research, but Cole he would say hi, but he didn't have the nonverbal components of hi, and he walked out of the room and I said, hi, Cole, and he went, hi, and then he went home and he practiced it on all of the people all day. And then his teacher, who had him for 3 years, he actually generalized it to saying goodbye, and his teacher, who had him for 3 years, did not know anything about Milo. It was time for them to go on March vacation, and Cole went up to every child in the classroom and went, uh-oh, what did I do? Okay. Bye, and went to every child. And the teacher wrote a note and said, in the 3 years I've worked with Cole, I have never seen him be so social, which of course made my heart just sing. But, and it was only one child, right? But he generalized it like that. You could see him looking at the screen, you know. He was really processing the language in a way he hadn't processed the language before. So that was Cole. So going back to the study, that was the 4-year-old got that with Milo. In the classroom, to collect the generalization data, what I did is I had 4 teachers. It was a classroom with lots of speech pathologist interns in there. And so I had 4 of them who, when the child would come in the morning, would kind of stand near him to see if he would initiate, because the greeting is initiating greeting, would come over and initiate a greeting. And if he didn't, sometimes he would say hi, but they wouldn't look and smile, right? But they had to look, smile, and say hi. So we did that. That was the first phase of data collection. The second phase is we showed the child a visual support. So they'd be standing there and they'd say, see if he would say hello. And if he didn't, they would just go like this and show the child the support and see if the child came over and looked, smiled, and said hi. And so this is his data. This was during baseline. Now the teachers didn't know what phase, they were blind to what phase we were doing with Milo, right? So in baseline, he didn't look, smile, and say hi in the classroom. He started just a tiny bit without any supports. It was still a little bit here, but he definitely bumped up quite a bit once there were supports in the classroom that were supports that were the same language and the same supports as Milo. Again, that goes to Shelley's comment. We have to be using the same language with the child. We have to have a team approach. So it can't be Milo by himself, or we go back to that medical model, right? We need to all be doing the same thing. So that was that. Now, I did learn, the parents had no idea what I was doing. I did learn that sometimes when kids come in the morning, they're a little dysregulated. So I was actually, it was a really great design, but you know, feasibility had some problems because once again, I see you, because they were a little too dysregulated. They didn't want to say hello in the morning. And they actually said hello a lot more when they weren't, when it wasn't the morning. They'd go up to different people. Yes? No, oh, 5 minutes. Oh, okay. So I didn't think I was going to take up this much time. Okay, great. Okay, I'm almost done. So this is the data from the second one. It's the generalization data for lesson 2. Remember I said lesson 2, Milo asked a question, the child had to give an answer, and then the child had to ask a question back. The generalization data, there were 3 children, 3 teachers asked 3 questions to each child. We took a set of questions that we created that were based on the theme of the week before. So if the theme was going to the dentist, the questions that week would be about going to the dentist. And we had different levels of, one of the teachers was a classroom teacher, one was a speech therapist, and one was an itinerant. So the children knew the teachers in a different level. So they had 3 teachers came and asked 3 questions 4 days a week. So the kids had 36 opportunities a week to answer and then ask back. And we were looking at asking back. Again, the first phase, no support, and then the second phase, we would say, your turn, the support was your turn, ask a question. And here is Charlie's data. Now what I want to show you, this is baseline. Look at, she didn't do anything until here. The teachers were like, this was 12 weeks in. The teachers was like, she's not doing anything, especially during here. She's not doing anything. And we're, that's fine. It's just take the data, right? So this is baseline. Here is Charlie was not accurate, 50% accuracy with the robot, and so you weren't seeing any generalization. Here's 100% accuracy with the robot, so we let it go 3 times with being 100% accurate with the robot, and then we ran out of the semester too, and then this is with adding the support. So she had a bigger bump than the 4-year-old, but you do see once you add the support in the classroom, the kids are able to generalize a lot more. And this is the other child. He was 5'8", and it just tells the same story. Here he baseline, he wasn't accurate, he became accurate, and then we did the next phase, and he had a really big bump in terms of his generalization. So Milo, to me, is only another tool in our toolbox. It's a fabulous tool. Kids are really understanding Milo, and I think that's really great. But Milo's lessons need to be supported in the classroom, or they might not generalize. Some kids, like Cole, they might generalize, but I think we need to be prepared to support it in the classroom. I will say that after I did this study, I went to Robokind and I asked if I could write a classroom companion. I don't think it's being distributed yet, but I know that teachers are really, really busy. The manual has lots of great information in it, but it's not something a teacher can rip out and use really easily. Shelley and I were talking about this earlier. You want to make it so teachers can't fail. Right? You want to give them what they can do so that they can't fail in the interaction. So that's the type of companion that I wrote. So it's my hope that teachers will begin to take what Milo's doing in the therapy room and to bring it into the classroom and use the same supports and use the same kind of social narratives and really help these kids to generalize. I don't know if they'd understand the lessons as well if it wasn't for Milo, but that's what my research is showing, and I'm grateful. Questions? Yes.
So how long they maintained that newly learned skill?
How long? I can't tell you that because I don't know. I wasn't at the school and I left. That's one of the things with I didn't have another phase of my research, so I couldn't tell you that. Sometimes, researchers are confined with what finances they have and those kinds of things.
The funding runs out.
Yeah.
And you have to move.
Right. So.
Another thing I wanted to ask is that do you think that you will get the same sort of effect if you delivered the same set of interventions using another humanoid robot?
I actually started a little pilot with that, and I actually have a grant that I have written but not submitted any place that looks at that. Because, okay, I wrote the lessons, right? Sometimes I say, well, is it Milo or is it me, right? Which is not a very humble thing to say. I think it's Milo. I think it's a combination. It's a collaboration between the robot with Robokind and Milo and my lessons, and the lessons are doing something, but I don't think, as I said, my graduate students can't synchronize verbal and visual the way he can. They forget to use the core vocabulary. He does it. So he's
the strength of the robot.
the fidelity of the intervention, the lower fidelity of the facial expressions, the lower fidelity of the, meaning there's less degrees of freedom, right, of the auditory signal. There's a lot of things that make the robot really important for engagement, right? And we know that ahead of time. And so it is a combination. But that is a study that I believe needs to be done.
Good to know.
Do you think that it's as effective with a group of children as opposed to a one-on-one?
Now it doesn't say that way with the manual, so I have not done that for study. I think Shelley may have done that. I've done that in the classroom, and I think it is. And I'll sometimes give them each their own set of support so they're touching it. And there's so many things, I have to do it the way it says it in the manual to test that out. But there's so many interesting, if you know how to work with children with autism, right? There's so many interesting ways that you can use Milo. I have one therapist who uses Milo as a second interactant in the class, in the therapy session. So they'll be talking together, then they'll talk to Milo, then they'll be talking together. So there's a lot of really creative things that you can do. But I'm just here looking at if you're in a school system and you give it to an aide who knows nothing about autism, what's going to happen? So that's sort of where I am there. Thank you.